Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Please keep yourself muted to minimize background noise. Please type in your questions into the chat box. I'll be looking at that, and we'll have time at the end for Q&A. And this webinar is going to be recorded and made available on our website. So if you have to duck out early, you will be able to watch the rest of it. It will be on our website probably in about a week. So I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide here and show you the agenda. We are going to start by learning some tips, tools, and tactics for organizing in rural communities. Then we'll move into 3 different examples from our various presenters of community organizing in action, and then we'll end with Q&A, and I hope that you'll take this as an opportunity to ask some questions at the end. And just a note that we did have a change in one of our presenters. Sorry, there's background noise. Again, if you don't mind keeping yourselves muted in the back, that would be useful. So we did have a change in one of our presenters. Amy Watts with Oregon Food Bank could not join us, but in her place is Lexi Stickle. And I will start by introducing her and all of our presenters, and then I'll pass off the baton. So Lexi Stickle received her concurrent Master's in International Studies and Conflict and Dispute Resolution with a Graduate Certificate in Nonprofit Management from the University of Oregon. Formerly, she worked as the Director of Operations for a small nonprofit based in central Mexico. She worked to expand the organization's communications and fund development, in addition to conducting community organizing in the rural communities. For the past 2 years, she has worked as the Community Food System Coordinator with Rare AmeriCorps at the Marion Polk Food Share, the regional food bank based in Salem. In her current position, Lexi conducted a community food assessment, organized over a dozen community organizing events, coordinated the first Mid-Valley Food Summit, and is coordinating 2 community-based teams in Woodburn and Grand Ronde. Jessica Campbell is the co-director of the Rural Organizing Project and works out of the Cottage Grove office. Jessica is a rural working-class organizer who got her start at Cottage Grove High School, working with her peers to pull off rolling student actions and a coordinated community campaign that successfully ended the mandatory viewing of Channel 1, a corporate TV advertising program that targets low-income and underfunded school districts. During her time on staff, Jessica has worked with some of the most rural communities in Oregon to support communities on the front lines of the militia movement, to fight for the small town commons from post offices to public parks, and to build toward the vision of health and vibrant rural communities where everyone can live their lives fully with dignity and safety. June Colony. She is 64 years old, born in Albany, but moved to Wallowa County, specifically Lostine, at 21. She worked in the potato fields, sheep herded in Hell's Canyon, truck farmed in the Imnaha Canyon, worked on a U.S. Forest Service trail crew, had a stream restoration company, started a native plant nursery in Pendleton, worked for the county in the land use planning office, raised 2 girls, and farmed. She's moved all around the country but came back to Lostine in 1990. She opened a downtown store in Lostine in 2009, started the Lostine Community Center for her church, and is a Grange member. She wrote and received over $400,000 in grant monies for various projects, including a farmers market grant for Lostine and Wallowa and a value-added grant for her sheep and wool products. She's also the grandmother of 1 perfect boy. Melissa Ferry is our final speaker. She has 2 children that are attending Harrison Elementary School in Cottage Grove, Oregon, and began working on farm-to-school programming for South Lane School District as a volunteer in 2014. With support from community partnerships, Melissa led the school district through a process of securing grant funding to launch a comprehensive district-wide program. She now serves as the part-time program coordinator. Melissa also works as an associate professor of practice for OSU Extension Service, providing research-based information to small farming operations in the southern Willamette Valley, a position she has enjoyed for the last 11 years. So, without further ado, I would like to invite Lexi Stickle to be our first presenter. Lexi, can you hear us? You might be muted. Are you there, Lexi?
I think I'm.
Oh, there you are.
I think I've been unmuted.
You are unmuted.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So like Tracy said, my name is Lexi Stickle, and I'm the Community Food Systems Coordinator at the Marion Polk Food Share. Shortly to transition to the Community Food Project Manager, and so that role will expand a little bit beyond just organizing, which has been my primary focus for the past 2 years. And Tracy asked me to come on and just talk about some tips, or really kind of the broad overall difference between urban and rural organizing. And I've predominantly just kind of dived into rural organizing within my last 3 years in my position before this, as well as at the Marion Polk Food Share. And Tracy, you can move to the next slide. Sorry. There we go. So I'm going to just start with some tips and then focus on some tips and techniques for using feast events, which I know have been covered in these feast leadership quarterly meetings. And they're not just for feast events. I think they speak to broad sort of organizing events overall. So if you don't do feast or you're not familiar with it, hopefully they're applicable to you as well. So these tips sort of focus on integrating into the rural communities. I think so much has to do with trust building with those communities that you're working in, especially if you're not a member. I think that's completely different if you are a community member out in a rural community and already have that trust built already. But I'm going to go from the standpoint of if you don't. So I work at a regional food bank based in Salem, and I work in communities across 2 counties in Oregon. And we go from a rural community of Woodburn, which I'm spending a lot of time in, with just over 24,000 people, to Grand Ronde, which is a Native community that I'm also working on that has just over 1,400 people. So I think the variety of rural also has us adjusting expectations often. So, for instance, if I go to a meeting or if I host a meeting in Grand Ronde and we have 5 people come, that's defined as a success for us. But if we only had 5 people come to me in Woodburn, we kind of start asking ourselves, well, what we didn't do, what we could have done better, just because of the difference in size. And I've also found overall with the trust building is that fewer people in these rural communities are often doing more things. And so you're a little bit harder, those really active community gatekeepers or champions who are doing a lot of work in these communities are often some of the only ones doing a lot of volunteer work in the communities. And so it's harder to find people who have the time, and it takes more time, I think, to work with those people and not only tell them who you are as a person. I found that really helpful. There's this sort of line between personal and professional that I often walk in these rural areas, but oftentimes when I go out to Grand Ronde, people are asking me about, my dog or my family, and so they know a little bit about me, I know a little bit about them, and that really helps build those connections on a personal level as well as a professional level. And so, you need to build that trust. People need to know who you are. They need to know that you're going to keep coming back to that area, or kind of what that future of that plan is. If you're in a position like a rare position that only lasts for 12 months, to be a little more upfront, honest about that and what you hope to do in that time period in which you're in the community. In terms of communication techniques, it's often helpful to find those community gatekeepers. Usually it's pretty easy. If you start going to meetings, you'll start seeing the same people time and time again. And those are the folks who are probably really active in those communities and just, make meetings with them, and that might look different from if you're, if I have a meeting in Salem, I'm usually going to an office and sitting down and having, a formal agenda or stuff to talk to somebody in their office, in their workplace. But if I'm going out to a meeting in a rural community, I'm going to someone's kitchen and having coffee and chatting with them. And so those meetings look different, and adjusting those expectations about those styles of organizing and meeting culture might vary in rural communities. And that's how you find those community gatekeepers and talking to them. And eventually, this is a tip that I was actually talking to another rare recently about, was finding a champion, so someone who will really get behind your cause and will really champion the community. So not only those people who are attending meetings and are really involved, but finding one of those people who really believes in what you believe in. And whether that's, in our case, food, it could be something else. So in Grand Ronde, we're working with this corner store pictured in this slide, and so it's taken us a while to find a champion who is really willing to help us work with that corner store and help us connect with that corner store and the owners of that corner store. And so, kind of for different things that we have different champions in the community where it'll be most appropriate to help us gain some traction and help us with different projects. Also, some other tips that other people have mentioned to me about the difference between urban and rural organizing. So, for instance, in some rural communities I work in, door knocking isn't really an effective tool because of the distance and isolation between these communities. So their houses can be really far apart. There may not be as formalized neighborhoods. And there may only be a couple places to hang flyers in terms of outreach for events. So we can actually go to the next slide. So these are more tips for like event organizing, whether that is a feast, whether that is something else. And so that outreach could look really different. I found in most rural communities, word of mouth is probably your strongest resource. So again, finding those gatekeepers and stakeholders and building that trust level, and really utilizing them to spread the word about events. And so an example of this is in Grand Ronde. We've been working for 2 years. We held a feast in February of 2015, and we had about 20 people come. A bunch, there's enthusiasm. People, however, the feast did kind of wrap up early, kind of broke for lunch, and everything kind of fell apart for the rest of the day. But we did gain traction and had a team form out of that work that has met every month for the past year and a half at this point. And so this past January 2016, a year after the feast, we wanted to hold a follow-up community conversation. And because we had finally found those stakeholders who were really involved in the community, who were on our team, who were bought into what we were doing, we barely advertised for the event. I was really worried no one was going to come. There's only a couple places to hold, post flyers in Grand Ronde. We did what we could. But really it was those stakeholders working with us who were talking to their friends and their communities and family members out in Grand Ronde, and we had just about 40 people come to the community conversation. And there's just such a drastic difference, not only in the amount of people, but the quality of the conversation. You could tell people were more bought in, more willing to participate, would share more about their personal story in that community conversation. And so that was really sort of a moment where I was like, we've really gotten somewhere in Grand Ronde, and that takes time in some of these rural communities. So your kind of approach and style is slower, and it takes more time with building the relationships, and there needs to be kind of that investment of time and that willingness to put in that time to really see those results. And you also might need to change who you would normally work with in an urban area. So you might not have those service providers or politicians or these people who you might normally reach out to as community gatekeepers. And in rural areas, it could look a little different. It could be the member of the local Grange. It could be churches, school teachers. Just really varies depending on the community. But oftentimes I've noticed, working with a local farmer might be the best course of action in some of these rural places. And they might be a really great community gatekeeper who are really involved, and you just never know, it could be a retired grandmother. So all of those relationships tend to look a little bit different, I've noticed, in the urban to rural divide. And lastly, about sort of these event organizing, these are 3 questions that I think have really helped me when I'm planning a meeting. And so in terms of like the location and the time, where do people already gather? Are you asking them to go to somewhere where they feel safe and they're comfortable going and often go to, know how to get there? Just in terms of the geographic distance, it might be really hard to get people to come to one church, but another church they might more commonly go to. Also, are there meetings already happening? Do you really need to hold a separate one, or can you kind of tie yourself into a community event that's already happening, or sort of build the momentum through talking at a couple of different events and then hosting your own that has a more specific focus? Also, on that same vein, sporting events are normally a big deal in rural communities just across the board. Sometimes that looks different. In Grand Ronde, it was wrestling, and we originally scheduled a feast on the day of a wrestling match, and everyone was like, oh, no, we need to change it last minute. We need to move the location. No one will come. And it was just something I would have never thought of. I looked up the high school sport schedule in advance, and I was like, oh, a wrestling match. That's probably okay. But in the specific community, wrestling was a sport that a lot of people supported and would go and watch their high school team represent at. It might be basketball, it might be baseball, it might be soccer. So it's sort of important to know what else is going on in that community the day of your event that might distract people from coming, and also what's the incentive. In feast events, food is really big, childcare is really big. In a couple of rural communities, we've played around with the idea of reimbursing people for travel because it's just hard to get out there. They might be living 10 miles away and having to drive that distance. And so offering that reimbursement, help them get there, or have gas cards people can have to raffle off at the event or something like that could be a good incentive to help people to just come and help them have the time to come as well. And so I think that kind of addresses all of my points. I don't know if we take questions now or at the end. I believe we have a couple other rares on the call who have also been doing this work for a while who might have some good input too at some point. So I don't know, Tracy, if you want to move on.
Yeah, thanks, Lexi. We'll save all Q&A for the end, and we do have a couple of other rare members on the call, so might be able to direct some questions to you two specifically. Thank you for sharing those tips, and I will now invite Jessica Campbell.
All right, thank you. So my name is Jessica Campbell, and I am the co-director of the Rural Organizing Project. And before we jump in, just a little bit about ROP is that we were founded 25 years ago. We just hit our 25th annual membership meeting where ROP was founded. And it was founded in response to ballot measure 9, which was being pushed by the Oregon Citizens Alliance to create second-class citizenship by writing into the Oregon Constitution that gays and lesbians are abnormal and perverse. After that campaign lost at the statewide level, the Oregon Citizens Alliance then went on to a county-by-county, city-by-city rural strategy. And the ROP was founded by those communities who were on the front lines wanting to get together to break their isolation and to be able to share strategies and resources across communities. So we still are a network at our core of currently 54 groups across 31 of Oregon's 36 counties. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So we base all of our organizing off of these all volunteer groups that are really based in their communities, really deeply grounded there. We don't parachute in. We do not actually believe that that is an effective strategy for long-term change and long-term movement building. So before we dig into some of the organizing tips and tools, I know that after looking at the attendance list, that there's a whole bunch of folks who are actually outside of Oregon who could be potentially listening in here and watching this later. So just to paint a little bit of a picture of what's going on in rural Oregon and some context for what I'm going to talk about, let's just dig in real quick. Rural community infrastructure has been defunded, destabilized, and neglected for over 30 years now. We now have places in rural Oregon that don't even have 24-hour 911 dispatch, and a whole lot more places that don't have 24-hour sheriff's deputy coverage. So we're actually in a place where many rural communities are feeling insecurity and vulnerability in really intense ways right now. We're also working in an environment where the right has built power, controls rural governments, and dominates community conversations. And why that is important to name is actually what comes with that is an agenda that is smaller government, less funding. Let's not actually fund sheriffs. Let's just kind of let people handle themselves. And we're now in this predicament where we actually have huge resurgence of the militia movement that is actually telling people who feel unsafe to form militias. So we'll dig into that in a little bit soon, but kind of the bottom line with this is the way that the right has built up power is we can look at election results and see that actually long-term thinking and long-term strategy really matters in terms of creating change that is going to last over the long haul. And how we believe that happens best is through building relationships, having campaigns that move real change and build base. Next. So I know that this is a rural organizing call, but any organizing that prioritizes building strong relationships that are meant to last over the long haul is the best organizing. And that is especially true. You heard Lexi just describe, building trust with people, being able to have real, honest conversations about what's going on in their communities is so critical. And of course, if you are having challenging conversations with people and trying to have transformative conversations with people, having a relationship, having that trust there is just critical. Next. So, as I mentioned, we're a network of groups, and so that is what this piece really focuses on, is how do you actually build a group based of people in the community. You start with the core, and then you build out. So just some guiding questions here. Who do you already know? Who might be your buddy? Who might be your neighbor? Who might already be an ally in whatever campaign or issue is invoking a response? Who do they know? Who should care about what you're working on, and how do you find those people? So for example, I'm going to talk about rural post offices next. And those folks really found each other based on who's actually a community leader. In some of these communities, populations 200. Who are community leaders? They're the people with the church, which is the only publicly accessible building in the community alongside the post office. So how do you reach the church membership? Those are some of the strategic questions that should come up. We also really advocate that people really think hard about how they're approaching the issue from a values-based perspective. Do you care about rural post offices just because it would be harder for you to mail a letter 2 hours away at the nearest post office? Or is it actually because your community post office is a community center that's worth fighting for and saving? So really thinking strategically about what is the impact here long term, and how does it actually advance your community's values versus just advancing an issue campaign. Next. So once you have a core team, it's up to base building. And that is where you're reaching out to folks, building relationships for the long haul. Next. And my mentor, Marcy Westerling, the founder of ROP, was very good at saying, if you are rich, you can just buy a lobbyist and kind of get what you want accomplished. But for the rest of us, we actually need to organize, and we do need to build a base. And we need to be thinking in terms of campaigns. Often folks are, and especially in rural communities, as I mentioned, feeling insecure and vulnerable, people have very short-term goals. Might be just get people together for one meeting, and actually thinking in terms of campaigns, in terms of longer sustained efforts, and how those events are playing into that campaign is how we actually build a movement and move people. One educational event is often not enough to get people there. We need to be thinking long term, and campaigns are the broadest term for how you link these pieces together, including actions, including events. Next. So in terms of strong groups, and this is a lot of what we do at ROP, is actually helping people build some of this infrastructure so they can then go on to do their strongest organizing, is building a leadership team that is sharing the work and making sure it's not just one person. It's actually a sustainable model if you have multiple people engaging and sharing the work. A way of communicating to your supporters and communicating to anyone who has been to one of your events or has ever thrown a couple bucks into your donation jar. And finally, a strong action plan. What are you actually trying to accomplish over the next year, 18 months, 3 years? Next. So I'm going to actually talk about some of these concepts and tools within the context of a couple of different campaigns. The first is a fight for rural post offices. Swiss Home, which is pictured here, is a small community. It's about 200 to 250 people, depending on the time of year, in Western Lane County. It's not too far away from Mapleton, for those of you who are following along on your maps at home. Next. So part of what happened with this post office campaign is that the Postal Service came into over 43 communities across Oregon, and it happened nationwide the same way, saying that their post offices were going to be closed. Our phones were ringing off the hook, and so we decided to dig in with groups and actually provide them some real resourcing so they could figure out how to most strategically use their limited capacity as all volunteer folks to actually move their communities to push back against the closure of their post offices. Many of these communities, the post office is the only piece of publicly accessible physical infrastructure left. So in Swiss Home, when the roads were blocked for 2 weeks by mudslides, the post office is where people gathered to actually say who has insulin, who has clean water, how do we actually make sure that that's getting to the people that need them that are running out of supplies. So there were multiple tools used for that work, including one-on-ones. And there's a lot of people who kind of roll their eyes at one-on-ones, but it is actually, I believe, one of the strongest pieces of organizing that we can do. It is sitting down with whoever. It might be someone you want to recruit to a leadership team. It might be someone that you want to move on an issue. It might be someone who you want to be a spokesperson. You sit down with them, you get to know them, you learn about their families, you learn about their critters, you learn about their livelihoods, and you make an ask. And actually having a routine of doing that regularly is incredibly useful. Similarly, we use a model called living room conversations that are a popular education-based tool. And what that really means is that it's not a presentation. It isn't just someone coming in and being a talking head and educating everyone else. It's actually a facilitated conversation that allows for all of the collective experience in the room to inform where that conversation goes. And we've used it multiple times to great success, including around immigration, including around post offices, including around the militia movement, etc. And part of the beauty of living room conversations versus gathering in a public library is that rural people are polite, man. They are so polite. And so folks would not stand up and leave a living room even if they're having a really hard conversation that was really uncomfortable, because their manners say that that's not an okay thing to do. Whereas if you were in a library, totally kosher to get up and split. And so we actually really use that as a way to have the harder conversations about, there's this rhetoric in town about the jobs going missing and people are blaming the immigrants, but let's actually look at the mills for a second. Let's actually look at the different industries and dig in. Let's talk about NAFTA. There's also kitchen table activities, which we advocate that our groups do at least once a month, get their people together to engage on something together. And we do, we'll put out every month a kind of bite-size activity for groups to opt into or not. All of our groups are autonomous. They don't do what we say. They tell us what to do. So we just kind of feed different ideas, and groups who have postcard making parties or go meet with their legislators or present an award for, exemplary service in the community. Doing these different actions once a month helps build up that base. Finally, we also advocate and also have a lot of fun figuring out creative uses of existing meeting spaces, community spaces, etc. And so, for example, with the post office campaign, the Postal Service came around to multiple communities to say that they were listening, but then wouldn't actually really listen. They would just do their presentation and try to leave. And so, excuse me. So we had multiple communities who really took advantage of the fact that the Postal Service was coming to town to get their entire town mobilized, and then to block the doors to politely say, no, we've presented a presentation for you, please sit down and listen. And actually the communities that did that, who actually got like the retired sheriff to say, no, please sit down and listen, actually won their post offices immediately. So taking advantage of some of those all existing gathering spaces to then kind of turn it around has been really fun. Next. So now I'm going to show a couple examples of what that looks like in practice. This is Deadwood, again in Western Lane County, population of just over 200. They would have to drive over an hour to the nearest post office if their post office were closed. And they not only had a horse-drawn carriage, they had construction equipment, they had all sorts of things as part of this really fun action where we intentionally chose the busiest day of the year of the post office, which is the Monday before the before Christmas. So people are lined up, people are maybe a little grumpy, maybe hungry to go home quickly, and we actually took advantage by having carolers and cookie deliveries and hot cider and lots of opportunities to talk about how the post office is a lot more than for just sending mail in some of these communities, and that postmasters actually serve a fundamental community role. Next. This is Swiss Home, and same story. And people just really had a lot of fun. We had actions that were huge, some that were lasted all day, and people took shifts, which is what happened in Swiss Home. So this was this family's kind of 2-hour shift. Next. And this is an example of a solidarity rally that happened in Cottage Grove. So for those of you who live in Cottage Grove, I know there's a couple on the call. Maybe you'll see some familiar faces. Next. So this doesn't just apply to post offices. All of these principles are organizing principles that can be applied in any situation. And so very quickly, this is a situation, you know, we've had multiple national mobilizations of militia groups and paramilitaries from across the country to rural parts of Oregon. And we have supported communities on the front lines, really pushing back and saying, this isn't how we solve our problems. And actually, we don't need you to speak for us. So this is from April 2015 in Josephine County, which is near Grants Pass. It was kind of the first standoff. It didn't make national headlines the way the occupation out in Harney County did. But we immediately jumped into action, got folks into one-on-ones very quickly to say, hey, did you hear that this is happening? Are you starting to see people show up in town with guns? We need to talk about this. And we broke people's isolation because people were so terrified that this was happening. And we were able to get folks together to take action. Next. And what that really looks like is digging into here some of the different pieces. You know, as I mentioned, rural infrastructure has been defunded for decades. And so in Josephine County, it was a situation where they literally had a deputy who was on call 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and the rest of the time, good luck. So this kind of insecurity really primed the entire state, and certainly rural Josephine County, for the militia movement to come in and say, we have a solution for you. You don't want to live without police? Form a militia. Oh, and by the way, here's some racist stereotypes, and this is also part of what should be integrated into your militia. So what we have seen is that these folks actually do these big mobilizations and then claim to speak for rural Oregonians. And part of our role has been really working with the community there to really reclaim their voice and actually push back so that they lose their popular support, pack up and go home. Next. And before I go into the photos, and I'm almost done here, Mary Oliver is a brilliant woman for a bunch of reasons, but I think that this is a great summary of organizing. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. And the bottom line is it's not good enough to just talk to your friends about it, but actually engaging in community conversation and community awareness raising is just critical. Next. So as I mentioned in Josephine County, this happened in April 2015 with this big mobilization. And what folks did through utilizing these tools of one-on-ones, of living room conversations, of jumping into community spaces to talk to other folks that are saying the right things, they were able to pull together a really incredible press conference, which included local business owners, the retired dean of the community college, teachers, newly moved residents, faith leaders. I mean, it was just a great representation of the community. And they held this press conference on the courthouse steps saying, we don't know what these people are here for, but they don't speak for us, and we want this to end before anybody gets hurt. Please go home. Please leave our community that's already struggling to stay connected to find our own solutions. And then you'll see to the right, they also did a signature ad, which includes beautiful language about their vision of their community. They got hundreds and hundreds of signatures with, 48 hours notice and put it in the paper. Quickly after the occupation wrapped up, they weren't able to say anymore that the community was treating them like heroes. Actually, the community had gone on record saying that they were scaring the hell out of them, and they weren't able to lie to their supporters. The militia movement wasn't able to get them to mobilize from out of state. Next. We saw a very similar situation in Harney County, and we spent a lot of time out there when the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge was being occupied. The culmination of a month-long occupation was actually a huge mobilization on the courthouse steps. So out in Harney County, the entire county population is 8,000 people. There were 350 people on a Monday at noon in front of the courthouse. That's 5% of the population. They closed down their businesses. They sent anyone home and then to the protest who wanted to participate. And it was a really vibrant showing of the community saying, this is our community. You do not speak for us. It is time for you to get on and get out of here. We're done with the threats. We're done with the acts of intimidation. We speak for ourselves. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Which was incredibly vibrant because it also included the Burns Paiute tribe. It was a really broad cross-section of the county, which was beautiful and powerful. Next. And there you can see opposing them in the into the street was actually the militia movement. So there were 100 or so folks there with the militia movement that were putting targets on people's clothing, who were trying to start fights that were getting in people's faces. And our folks actually were incredible. They engaged them lovingly but firmly and really made it clear that this isn't a personal thing, but they want their community to go back to normal. What quickly happened is that the militia movement was not able to sustain their energy. Again, they had been saying that they were going to be welcomed as heroes, and this demonstrated for the world that Harney County wasn't asking for this, did not want it to happen, did not want any of this to continue. And they packed up and they quickly left. So again, the same principles, the same tools, the same tactics were used of one-on-ones, living room conversations, engaging in every opportunity where there was a community meeting, a county meeting, a library board meeting, in order to get people on the same page about having a public stand to send a message that Harney County has its own voice, does not need the militia movement to speak for it, and they were successful. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Really appreciate that. June Colony, you are next. Can you hear us, June? I'm going to see if I can't send you a message. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Well, I'm hoping that we can bring June back into the conversation, but I think in the meantime, if Melissa, you are ready, we can have you go, and we'll just switch the order. I know that you've been having a hard time seeing the slides, so we'll see if we can't figure that out together.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I cannot see the slides for some reason, but if you want to forward on to the logo, Southland School District logo. I can just kind of wing it.
I will do that. I'm advancing the slides right now, and I'll just go ahead and the logo is up.
Okay, great. So when Tracy asked if I would be willing to share in this webinar today, I had to really think about it because I don't identify myself as a rural community organizer. I have been working for OSU Extension Service for a number of years, and I approached our community program, this farm to school program, as just another need or issue that needed some attention. And so I reached out to people that I felt had the skills to help me make this project roll. And together we just determined a plan and made it work. And so if that's rural community organizing, then I'm totally on board. My part in the Southland School District Farm to School, and we also include school gardens in this program, started in early 2014, so just about 2.5 years ago. And I was a parent volunteer in my son's elementary school classroom, and now we even have this official logo. And it was basically pulling together what different people were already working on and lending as much support as we could and seeking grant funding for this project. To kind of put it in perspective, as far as our school district goes, we have about 2,600 students. We have 3 K through 5 schools, 2 K through 8th grade in very rural areas away from the Cottage Grove area by at least 10 miles. And then 1 middle school and 2 high schools, one being pretty traditional, and then the other is considered an alternative high school that focuses more on vocational programs. Okay, next slide. With the 3 of us there. It started with these 3 people. I'm one of them. I was a parent volunteer in Sherry Skadberg's 2nd grade classroom. And Sherry is a school teacher, of course, and she's also the school garden liaison at Harrison Elementary. She is a person that is completely supportive of anything that will be wonderful for children and getting kids to have experiences outside the classroom and including the school garden. So she was definitely a liaison between me and the school itself. And then we have Beth Poole. She's a community partner, and this gal, she's amazing. She talks to everyone. She puts herself out there. She believes and supports anything related to food, nutrition, agriculture, community food systems. And she was the one that really took a lead in organizing the Cottage Grove Feast event that happened in April 2014. So what basically had happened is I wasn't able to attend that feast event, but I did read the minutes, and something jumped out at me about the school garden, serving local food in the school district. And I thought, hey, that sounds exciting, and I think I can help with that. So I reached out to Beth, and the 3 of us grew to, if you want to show the next slide with all the logos, grew to all these partners. And different individuals within each of these organizations played a role in helping us build this program in our community. I met with Beth just about 2 years ago now, and we talked about what the feast event had as far as conversations around farm to school programming. And I just started reaching out to these different organizations and finding people that were truly interested in the same topic. And one of the first people that I found was Megan Kimple with the Willamette Farm and Food Coalition in Eugene, just about 25 miles north of us in Cottage Grove. And she introduced me to a new term, phrase that I had never thought about before. And it was, you need to show capacity. If you want to be successful in finding funding especially a competitive grant, you have to show that you can do this work. Your school district has to be able to show capacity. So that really resonated with me, and I thought, how can we show capacity in South Lane School District for a comprehensive farm to school program? And so I went back to Sherry Skadberg and Beth Poole, and we looked for very local funding and found that through the Cow Creek Umpqua Indian Foundation. And they awarded us a small $5,000 grant that we received at the very beginning of 2015. And we ran with that money and stretched it as far as we could. And we showed capacity and started building this capacity through getting this little tiny grant and then inventorying what was currently happening at just this one school in this school district. And you can show the next slide if you'd like. We knew we had a school garden that the kids loved. They would line up for watering during recess so they could just, have an activity. We've had kids that would seek out the garden because they didn't fit in well with other activities during recess time. And we had a couple great community volunteers that would come during this time and be active. So we knew we had that, and because I work with small farms throughout this part of the Willamette Valley that I live in, I wanted to see about making a strong connection between the students and the farms and building relationships with our area farmers and showing the kids that what they're doing in their garden, working in their little greenhouse and growing food and putting cucumbers in their backpack to take home and kale in their pockets also relates to what people are doing for a living and supporting our community through providing local food. So that's what we did with this small grant from Cow Creek Umpqua Indian Foundation. And you can show the next slide. Students went to some farms and saw draft horses at this local organic vegetable farm. And then the next slide shows kids being draft horses and connecting what they're doing in their garden, at school, to what farms are doing and growing vegetables in high tunnels and selling that and providing this food. Another thing that was missing was just the implementation of curriculum that tied the garden to the classroom. And so Sherry was really interested in this, and we found Eat, Think, Grow, which is curriculum from the Portland area and fit in really well with the seasonality of our school gardens. Next slide. We also took kids to an alpaca farm where they learned about animal husbandry, fleece, spinning, fiber art. This project was really getting fun now. More people were interested in participating and sharing with me how they could be of help. And next slide. We took the kids on a walking tour of our Coast Fork Farm Stand, which is a retail outlet in Cottage Grove that sells some locally grown food. And that even brought in more people that were just, kind of interested in this whole idea of farm to school. And we built this program at one particular school. And I continued to just reach out to key players. And one of those key players in this whole project is Monica Yoss, who is our amazing food services director at the school district. And she is open to trying new ideas. But I think what was really an important part of this project is that I listened and listened to their concerns and their challenges, and I validated those because there are challenges with any project when you're bringing people together. And I just wanted people to know that I recognize those. So how can we build a project that would strengthen the investment that's already made and give support to the different people that were involved? And so about this time, the RFP for the federal USDA Farm to School grant came out. And this was the spring of 2015. And before I went to the school district superintendent to pitch this idea and offer to work on drafting a grant, these community partners like Beth and a school board member, Alan Boss, and others from Sustainable Cottage Grove and those involved with CG Feast had already bought into this idea, and they had already greased the skids, so to speak. So when my meeting with the superintendent rolled around, she already knew these partners that didn't have they had different skills than I did. I wasn't able to just randomly talk to people about this project idea, and my partners were, and they were excited, and I benefited from that because the superintendent was like, "Yep, this sounds like a good idea. This makes sense for our wellness committee that's already established in our school district." And so we just built off that, and it worked out pretty well. We wrote the grant and submitted it, and in the meantime, there's like this 6-month waiting period to find out if you receive funding, and we continued with other activities. And so if you want to show the next slide, just little ways to get more local food into our school district, working with Monica and our food services director. I invited a local farmer to offer grapes that were grown just a few miles away from town at a evening family event. So we did this grape taste test of locally grown table grapes, and I sent this picture to Monica. I'm like, hey, the kids like them. And we were able to negotiate a deal with the farmer that worked for everybody, and then the school district started purchasing grapes directly from that farmer. So it was our first, or one of our steps into procuring local food. Next slide. I was just really trying to encourage excitement about this whole concept. And so we celebrated the harvest, and hopefully the picture up right now shows that we were out in school garden popping popcorn that the kids grew in raised beds, and we pressed local apples into cider, and invited volunteers and all of the grade levels out there to enjoy this activity. Next slide. So this is my text slide. November 2015, 6 months after submitting the proposal, we find out that the district received funding, and it was a really fun, exciting time knowing that we're going to use this one school as a model and then integrate into what's already happening at all of the other schools and all of the grade levels, and just support what they're doing with some funding, and then build this comprehensive program, have curriculum at all of our elementary schools, and work with garden clubs at the high school to hopefully rebuild a horticulture program at the high school level, and provide local food unit for the cooking classes at the middle school. And it was an easy sell. I mean, you can see our goals here listed. Who doesn't want to support school gardens as outdoor classrooms, or procure more locally grown food and processed foods for our food service program, or promote locally grown fruits and vegetables, or increase students' connection to farm gardens, where food comes from, the health benefits of eating fruits and veggies, and encouraging families to grow, cook, and eat more fruits and vegetables through different family engagement programs. I haven't found anyone opposed to this idea, so when we think about community organizing, if you have a topic that benefits so many people, especially children, others will just get behind it. And so off we've run for the last few months trying to pull these goals together. So our next slide. This is Jules, an AmeriCorps service member who works in our community right now. She's just wrapping up a community food assessment. But part of this grant was working with Oregon Food Bank to secure a small portion of her time to help implement Harvest of the Month in our school district. and promote locally grown fruits and vegetables. So it's just another way to bring in a partner, and Jules was great at this, and she continues to be. Okay. Um, I'm going to be wrapping up in just a couple minutes, so you can just go ahead and flip through the remainder slides as you like, just showing different activities. As I just share with you that one of the main things I continue to remember and encourage all of our different community partners to remember is that our school district had amazing things going before we got funding. They all had school gardens. Um, Everyone just needed like a boost, and to know that their concerns and their hard work is recognized, and that we want to support them because what they're doing for our kids in our community is worthy. And we are not trying to create a cookie cutter program at every school, but instead build on the strengths that they have at each individual school and the teachers involved, and creating a way that we can move this program forward for long-term success, because we know funding doesn't last forever. So we have about 1 year left in this grant, and we were able actually to secure some state farm to school funding as well to fill in some gaps that we recognized after talking to more partnerships. And we just keep coming back to, or at least I keep coming back to, let's make this a program that's just going to really jazz our community and our school district, but will lay a platform to continue beyond funding. And I think that's really coming together with offering cooking classes through Cooking Matters, and just finding resources that are already existing, like the Seed to Supper program, which is a partnership between Oregon Food Bank and the OSU Master Gardeners, and just making all these connections. And they just keep materializing, because the more energy and excitement behind this project, there are more people that are willing to step forward and volunteer, and making sure that they have a specific task that they can do that builds on their strengths has been a key point, as well as being grateful for any and all volunteer work they're willing to do. I just feel like this is really a way to look ahead and see how this current project and funding can be a catalyst, momentum for positive changes in our town. And it's even better when you're excited about it and you find the project fun. And I feel like that's where I'm at right now, and our community partners are feeling the same way.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was a really inspiring story, and I was able to match you with all the slides, so they've all been shown. Thanks for being so flexible about that.
Fantastic.
June, I hope that you can hear us now. Sounds like you heard us before, but we couldn't hear you, so I'm hoping that has changed. And as June comes on, I just want to let everyone else know that we are running a little bit behind schedule, so we will. June will probably finish her presentation by 11:45, and we'll invite anyone, speakers and guests, to stay on if you can for Q&A, but totally respect if folks need to jet off. So June, can't hear you. Might be an opportunity to dial in. Well, perhaps while we're waiting for June to call in, I hope that it will work. She just sent a note and says she's talking, but we can't hear her. I will try to work with her on the back end, but I do have a question, if any of the presenters are ready, from one of our participants today who asked, can anyone speak to their experience using the local newspaper or radio to promote their activities and other outreach? And Christy is actually in Wallowa County. So definitely in a rural community. If any of our presenters would like to speak to that, that would be great. You may have to unmute yourself.
This is Jessica with the Rural Organizing Project. Yeah, we always use local media and have found great success in doing so over and over and over again. We are definitely in a moment where younger folks are looking more to social media, but certainly small town papers are not dead. And if you have a local radio station, for example, we have KNND here in Cottage Grove, and going on the beeper show is always a lot of fun. And it starts a conversation that people are ready to take onto social media or to have with their neighbors. And so we both, publish any kind of event or meeting announcements in the paper, as well as publish letters to the editor and op-eds, and really encourage our member groups to build relationships with the local editors and reporters so they can kind of hop on a story when it comes time for it to be published. And just really quickly as an example, we recently had a hate crime in our community where a young gay man was brutally attacked. And the regional paper, actually based out of Eugene, the Register Guard, reported some bad information and actually kind of misquoted local law enforcement in saying that he wasn't injured, when in fact he was kicked in the head over a dozen times. He was injured. And our local paper actually produced the best coverage of what exactly happened. And when we had a huge vigil with over 100 folks there, they took beautiful photos that are going to be in the next paper. So cannot understate how fundamental having a good local media plan is. And that's true of your neighboring county up in Baker County. Apparently they don't have word limits on their letters to the editor, which means you basically get a free article as long as you're willing to write it. It's really awesome.
That's a great resource. Fantastic. Thank you for hopping in. I appreciate that, Jessica. June, are you there? Dang. We were problem solving in the back. She's trying to dial in right now, so perhaps we will get her back. In the meantime, if any of the other presenters want to speak to that question, I would invite you to. Otherwise, I have some other questions coming in that I can pose. Okay, I'll go ahead and present one of the questions that have been asked. Someone is specifically asking how to get people to take the initiative. So once there's been energy and momentum, how do you actually get people to take action on something? Jessica, you might be a great fit for that, or Lexi, or perhaps Jules, a rare member.
Well, I can jump in, I guess. So we do our work a little bit differently. As I mentioned, we really intentionally build up local leadership. We don't come in and lead. We support the leaders in leading. And so, probably the instances where it's hardest for us to actually get some forward momentum built is when there's a situation like a hate crime. And it's happened multiple times across the state where there's something that happens in a community that involves some level of violence or property destruction, and the community just really wants to believe that that wouldn't be possible. And it's actually a really natural reaction to not think that something horrific could happen in your small town that you so love. And so often what we have to do is actually kind of show up in person and send a staff organizer down to really talk with people about what it means to actually have a community response to really the value of having a community actually come out and say, this isn't how we do things in our community, not in our town. And it takes some encouragement, but that really kind of is the key for us, is actually showing up, being able to really have those good one-on-ones, again, heart to heart with people, and really say, what do you need to really show up as a leader right now? and we do our best to make that happen. You know, and I've done things like clean people's houses and watch their kids so they can go out and lead and organize. As Lexi mentioned, that is one of the major things for rural folks in terms of how they're able to show up in spaces. Is it actually revolves around their ability to actually get there, or childcare. And so we really work hard to problem solve around those pieces and really kind of get to the bottom of, is it they just don't want to have a hard conversation, or is there actually a different limitation going on that we can easily problem solve?
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Lexi looks like she would like to weigh in as well. Lexi, I think you have to unmute yourself because I can't do it on this side. There you go.
Oh, is there?
Yep, we can hear you.
I was just going to mention too, both to the last question about social media and communications in rural communities. Oftentimes communities have like community Facebook pages that can be really helpful for just broad advertising. And so we found some just in Grand Run and Woodburn that were more just community-oriented pages that we wouldn't have found without, you know, stakeholders being able to post on those for us. And then to the next question, my phone just got cut out, so I didn't quite hear the previous person's response, but I think it was about getting community members have the incentive to take action. And I was going to say that for us as feast organizing, it's been kind of a slower process of first, you know, kind of seeking out whoever you want to take action and understanding their strengths, and then sort of slowly handing off skills or duties to them, or helping them build skills and then pass off certain duties. And it sort of can be a slow process, but I've started to notice, for instance, with our monthly meetings we're having out there, there's slowly more leadership and other people facilitating the conversations or taking notes or sending out the reminder emails. And so slowly over time, our hope is that this community team will be meeting and doing things without us, but it's definitely a process of slowly getting people to, you know, one, have the buy-in to really want to spend that extra time, and also making sure that you're plugging into what their skill set is and what they already enjoy doing. So that was just my 2 cents on it.
Thanks. Appreciate that, Lexi. Well, it looks like June has tried calling in multiple times, and she can't seem to connect. So I apologize that you will not be able to hear from her. She has a really great story about saving, working with the community to save a rural grocery store there from closing in Wallowa County. So my apologies that you will not hear that story. We do have time for some more question and answer if anyone would like to pose a question to our presenters. So I'll give a minute for that. Yeah, in case June can call in, we'll definitely give her time, but yeah, now's a great time to pose some questions to our presenters. One question we do have is on multicultural engagement. I don't know if any of our speakers feel comfortable addressing this, but how do you engage a community when there are multiple languages being spoken? I would invite any of our presenters to speak on behalf of that.
This is Jessica with ROP again. I realize I'm taking up a whole lot of time, so feel free to be like, enough, let someone else answer.
No, I love it.
We do a lot of work. We do a lot of work in multicultural communities, and we are a predominantly white organization. We do reflect the demographics of rural Oregon. So there is that piece that we own really explicitly when engaging in multicultural work. And we actually find value in working with white communities on issues that organizations rooted in and based in communities of color are prioritizing that maybe white folks wouldn't necessarily be jumping on without some push and some understanding about what is going on and why it's valuable. So, for example, the new Supreme Court ruling on immigration is going to be a whole new push now because DAPA, which would allow for folks to get legal residency in the country who have lived here and are family members of citizens, that's stalled. And so that's going to encourage a whole new round of work for us. What we do when we're in rural communities and really digging in with leadership of color in particular is we really take their leadership seriously. And if we are in a situation where we are in a multilingual kind of space, we ensure that there's always interpreters and interpretation equipment. There's folks often willing to interpret for very, very cheap, if not volunteer. And equipment isn't too hard to find, especially if you're driving through an urban area on your way out. And that's just really pivotal for folks to be able to have the conversation. And one lesson that we've learned is that actually having simultaneous interpretation with headsets and actually having everyone wear headsets is really valuable in a situation like a living room conversation where you might have monolingual Spanish speakers and monolingual English speakers. Everyone gets to wear the headset. Everyone kind of gets to feel a little funny, but you're able to have the conversation together at the same time. We also have developed a little bit of a network of folks who are willing to be interpreters to interpret written materials and the like. And kind of the bottom line for all of our work is that we work really hard to remain accountable to the communities that we're engaging with. So we regularly have conversations about how can we be doing better? How can we show up differently? Are there other ways that we can be supporting the work that needs to happen? So that way, leadership of color actually has multiple opportunities to give us really pointed feedback about how do we actually make the spaces as accessible as we can, or voter guides that we have interpreted into Spanish. This year we're talking about, do we actually want to interpret it into other Southern American indigenous languages, because we have multiple communities now in rural Oregon that might really enjoy a ballot measure guide this year. Just to understand what all the hoopla is about and what are the issues that are going on and what is the rest of the community really digging into. And we do that, again, taking real leadership and advisement by folks from those communities. So it's a relationship building first and foremost to ensure that we're doing the work that we need to be the way that we need to be.
Fantastic, thank you. Do any of the other presenters want to weigh in on that?
This is Melissa. So I just, in our program in Southland School District, we reached out to a partner. It's Peggy's Primary Connection that we know has an English as second language program, and they were so interested in having a basic gardening class for Spanish speakers. And they were, because this is something that they already do, we're just able to kind of support their efforts and get the curriculum that they need and a little bit of funding to make, to pay for a translator if necessary, and just trying to build off of organizations or community partners that are already in place doing some sort of multicultural work that we can find a common goal with and utilize that partnership. That's kind of our approach to this specific project that I'm working on.
Thanks, Melissa.
I know we're just at time, but this is Lexi, and I can speak a little bit to our work in Woodburn as well. And so we approached Woodburn for a Feast community organizing event and learned really quickly on that they were still struggling with basic needs. And so when you're talking about a socio-ecological model, you can't really address larger food system work if people's basic needs aren't being met. And so, and we just weren't getting traction to do a feast, and we thought we were we had, the right community gatekeepers, but folks just weren't really jumping on board. They had issues they wanted to talk about that were more directly related to food access and hunger. And so we flipped the model a little bit to begin with a feast model called a hunger-free community forum for just service providers who are bilingual predominantly. And so our meetings have been, those sort of feast meetings have been predominantly in English mixed with Spanish for service providers who speak both languages. And then we've had separate, we're just starting to have some separate community conversations or going to community events that are already happening and those are in just straight in Spanish. And so when we've been struggling with the feast, is you can do the headset model or other things that Jessica, I think, was speaking to. But you almost create two different subgroups because in that community organizing model, when you break up into small sections, you might not have an interpreter for everybody. And so that's where it gets a little trickier in terms of how we do that. So we've decided actually that if we go the route of doing a community feast in Woodburn, that it'll be monolingual in Spanish, and we might have some English translation on the side if needed, because most of the community members who are engaging with us at this point are Latinos. And also, I did want to pipe in as someone who used to be an interpreter and stuff. We've written into our budget a little bit to work with community partners. There's a nonprofit based out of Portland that we've worked with recently, as well as a nonprofit here in Salem that has a translation service. So they're as a nonprofit, their participants are translating documents, and it's been very affordable for us. But it also helps us feel like we're paying for some valuable work, and that we value the skills of translation. Not to say that other nonprofits don't who try to get those. We always try to get someone to volunteer to translate them, but we also like to make sure that our partners are feeling like we really value that work, and we pay them when we can for both interpretation and verbal and written. So I just wanted to type in that it's been really helpful to find these other nonprofit partners who aren't charging really high fees, and we're able to contribute and build together new partnerships with them through translation.
Great. Thank you so much. We are at time, and I just would like to extend a thank you to all of our presenters today. So grateful to have Lexi, Jessica, and Melissa on with us, and apologies that June Colony could not join us. Thank you so much for your time. I will be sending out a tip sheet on rural community organizing based on what we've heard today, and we'll also send a link to a evaluation for today's webinar. So thank you everyone for your time. Please reach out if you have any questions, and thank you again to our presenters.